He kōna ipurangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
Just a quick warning, this podcast contains strong language and descriptions of violence some listeners might find confronting. When you make podcasts, you never know who'll agree to talk to you. You inevitably tell yourself, there's no way they'll say yes. And when it comes to cops, past and present, my experience has been they're usually reluctant to discuss their cases. And the general rule is, the more senior the officer, the less likely they'll agree to be interviewed.
Hello, Ken speaking.
So when Ken Thompson, who was police commissioner during the Darcy to Hira murder investigation, agreed to speak to me, I'll admit I was somewhat surprised.
Oh, Ken, it's Mike Wesley-Smith here.
Yeah,
Hi, how are you?
good, thank you.
Good, sorry to bother you again.
Yeah,
You remember we had spoken a few weeks back?
yep.
Ken's retired now. He's in his 90s and lives north of Wellington. Coming from a long line of cops, Ken's own police career started in 1951, and he quickly moved through the ranks, becoming New Zealand's youngest commissioner, a role he held from 1983 until 1987. I'd sent Ken a copy of the June 1985 letter, written in his name, during Ernie's time in the Witness Protection Program. The one journalist Keith Davies described in the last episode.
Commissioner Thompson wrote to the Secretary of Justice, S.J. Callan, fearing for Ernie's safety, of his refusal to give evidence, of his solitary confinement in Takapuna, and the only suitable option of keeping him in a motel.
I asked what Ken could recall about the letter. Ken phoned me and said he was happy to talk.
Are you okay to do a phone interview?
Oh, yes, yeah, no worry.
Now, if I was surprised at him agreeing to be interviewed, well, that was nothing compared to his surprise about that letter.
What was your response to seeing that letter?
No, I hadn't seen it. I didn't know anything about it. You told me.
Wait a second, what? Ken's reply stopped me dead in my tracks. He'd never seen that letter? Not until I sent him a copy? Now, it's important to point out, the letter purportedly from Ken is not signed by him. It just has his name printed on it. In fact, the letter isn't signed by anyone. Ken went on to tell me he doesn't actually recall being briefed at all about Darcy to Hira's murder or Ernie's Witness Protection Program.
And obviously it has been a long time since the events in question. Do you consider that if it's possible that maybe you were briefed but can't recall it after the passage of time, or is this something you would have remembered?
I can recall a lot of things during my time, but certainly not that one.
And do you have any idea why you wouldn't have been briefed?
No. The fact that it was so unusual,
Yeah.
it seems like a most unorthodox process to me.
Now, the investigation did make the papers, but it's possible Ken missed the coverage. The case didn't make headlines in our biggest newspapers, and I don't think it was covered by the 6 o'clock TV news. And it's also worth pointing out that the bombing of the Rainbow Warrior, a major event with international repercussions, happened on the 10th of July 1985, just a few weeks before Ross's first trial. I wondered if it was possible that Ken's staff just thought he had enough on and didn't need this on his plate.
No, not really. No. We used to meet regularly, discuss things. I would really expect to have been briefed, even in the broadest terms.
As Ken said, he remembers a lot from his time as commissioner, but he was equally clear when my questions crossed into areas he just couldn't recall after all this time.
No, I can't really comment on that one.
When Ken said he wasn't told about detectives' dealings with Ernie, I went back over the police records I have. Like he said, it seemed so odd that he wouldn't know. An internal police timeline of the key events prepared in the 1990s doesn't record Ken as being involved with any of the key decisions regarding Ernie, which I think supports the idea he wasn't kept in the loop. Instead, the most senior officer mentioned was Ken's Deputy Police Commissioner, Mal Churches. For example, it was Churches, not Ken, that approved the $30,000 payment to Ernie. And things like Ernie's motel stay and early prison release were managed by other cops in the chain of command. Again, no Ken. I can't ask Churches about his role because he died some years ago. but Ken told me he used to meet regularly with churches when he was police commissioner.
So would you have expected to have been briefed about the operation?
Yes, I'd expect to know about it.
And was that because of the profile of it, but also that the murder had happened in Mount Eden prison?
Yeah, and the fact that there was so much shenanigan going on, with the man being down in Christchurch, and I'd really expect to have known of that.
Of course, the man in Christchurch was Ernie, and those shenanigans, well, that was Operation Icing, then New Zealand's most expensive and elaborate witness protection undertaking.
And I take from that in a broad sense that perhaps, given you were a by-the-book man, that maybe you wouldn't have gone along with it?
That is a possibility. I don't know. But as I've said, it's a most unusual procedure. I would have had some doubts about the fella, to be quite honest.
You mean the witness in question?
Yeah.
Again, here's Ken referring to Ernie.
What would have been your doubts about him?
Well, I don't like these so-called prison squeaks and what have you. They weren't in my good book.
During my work on this case, I'd heard a lot of names for jailhouse informants. Snitches, grasses, and of course, narks. But prison squeak was new to me.
Right, so in your view, people who needed to be treated with great care.
Yes.
And have everything documented, so
Yep.
they could resist any defence suggestions that perhaps they had just gone along with things to receive a benefit.
Yeah. I find some difficulty in accepting it.
Of course, Ken is just confirming what essentially was official police investigative doctrine back in 1985. But nonetheless, as we heard in the last episode, many key interactions between detectives and Ernie weren't recorded. And it was striking to now hear their boss at the time basically say that was not an approach he supported.
In terms of protocol at the time, was it your understanding that protocol was that if you had a jailhouse witness, you would first want to have their account documented in writing before you discussed things such as money or relocation?
Certainly with a scoundrel, yeah.
I asked Ken about the amount of money Ernie ended up getting paid for his evidence against Ross.
Police later described $30,000 payment as being exorbitant.
No stage it would have been.
For Ken, nothing about this case was normal procedure. Indeed, when we first spoke, and I outlined everything I discovered about this case, he told me it had an air of Disney about it.
Yeah, that's right, quite right, yeah.
Well,
I still believe that.
Yeah, perhaps one that you raise an eyebrow at.
Yes. True.
You're listening to Nark, an RNZ investigative podcast. I'm your host, Mike Wesley-Smith. This is episode 8, Honour Among Thieves. In this episode, you'll hear the evidence given to the jury in Ross Appelgren's first trial. You'll hear how they were asked to weigh the testimony of fraudsters and crooks and try to decide who was telling the truth. But as in many cases, before the jury heard this story, one reporter was all over it.
A little man just came in off the street and asked to see me and gave me the amazing story about what was going on in the prison and Darcy to Hira's death.
In 1985, Claire Parker was a senior journalist at the Sunday News newspaper in Auckland.
And I loved it. The Sunday News was like a family to me. I worked with some of the best journalists that you could possibly ever meet.
Police had been tight-lipped for weeks about their investigation into Darcy Tahira's murder. No press releases, no press conferences, radio silence. But their investigation, which Ken Thompson would come to describe as Disney-like, was about to become public. Because while police weren't talking, other people were. Claire was in her office at work that day in March 1985 when in wandered that little man with information about the Mount Eden murder.
He was a certainly a person who was in the know. He knew what he was talking about.
So that conversation you had with him then became the principal basis for your reporting in March of 1985 about the case?
That's correct, yes. I wrote from what this man told me. And of course, those were the days of shock, horror, probe. And I think that story had all those three elements.
Claire's explosive story made the front page on the 10th of March 1985 under a large headline, Brutal Jail Drug Killing. It was accompanied by a mugshot of Darcy. Here's Claire reading from her article.
A prison inmate brutally bludgeoned to death after he ripped off a jail drug ring, owed prison thugs $1,000 protection money. Prisoners have apparently stated that Darcy Hira, a prison trustee whose real name was Anthony Clement Hira, was supposed to collect a drug drop from the women's toilets on January the 5th. Hira allegedly not only had his own little drug racket operating, but also because of his trustee position, which allowed him free access, ferried drugs for the hardcore. You could get anything from heroin, marijuana to pills, anything you wanted, said our informant. It's claimed that when the drug drop vanished, the drug ring met to discuss beating up Hira. The next morning in the kitchen, other prisoners present were told to disappear because there was going to be a fight. Allegedly, the dead man was dealt severe blows from behind.
Claire's reporting rattled the police investigation. I know that because of an internal police memorandum I discovered among Ross's old files. The memo, dated June 1985, was written by Detective Sergeant Neil Morris. We've had an actor read his words.
The Sunday News came to us on about the Wednesday and said, right, this is the Strawberry printing, and gave it to us. It was quite accurate, surprising for them. Have you got any comment about it? Not, is it true, or do you want us to print it, but is there any comment? And Jenkinson just said no. He had no comment at all.
Jenkinson is, of course, Detective Chief Inspector Peter Jenkinson, the man we've come to know quite well. He was Neil Morris's boss, in charge of the Darcy Hira murder inquiry. And it appears Claire's questions forced police to move.
We went out on Friday and charged the guy.
That guy being Ross Appelgren. Until I told her, Claire had no idea her article had accelerated the arrest of Ross Appelgren.
Oh, I think they were probably in panic mode. I always found, on a one-to-one basis, police very obliging. But the moment they got in a huddle, they just got a little bit overcome with their own protocols.
Claire's suspicions there are backed up by Detective Morris's memo on Ross's arrest and the part the Sunday News played in it.
Expecting that probably, if the fact he was charged was in the paper on Saturday morning, that might negate a fair bit of the story or stop them printing so much. They went ahead with the whole lot anyway. The whole story, what it was about, the motive, didn't name the witnesses, but described them, including Ernie. They went off on another tangent, but they quite clearly knew he was one of the people we were talking to.
Even 40 years later, Claire's article is impressive. Her reporting of the murder's circumstances was broadly consistent with the prosecution case that hadn't even been made public. And she was on a roll. 2 weeks later, she broke the story that police had opened an additional investigation into claims of corruption at Mount Eden Prison.
An Auckland police inspector is currently assessing claims of drug trafficking, prison gambling racket, and sexual perversion at Mount Eden Prison. However, Senior Sergeant Trevor Tozer of Auckland Police said yesterday police were not in a position to comment on the allegations at this time.
Claire's source for all this? That mysterious man who came in off the street.
What can you recall about this man that came in randomly to see you?
Practically nothing. Not terribly tall, well built, I would say Maori or part Maori. I don't remember his name. I remember sitting and talking to him. I would say that he was definitely a person in the know. I would say he had probably been in prison, and he knew people still inside, and the gossip from the inside was on the tom-toms around the streets.
Tantalising clues, but just too vague to identify the man Claire spoke to. His identity remains a mystery. And another mystery to me is that police investigation into alleged corruption at Mount Eden Prison, the one Claire reported.
It was a question of who was running the asylum, the inmates or the people who were supposed to be in charge of them. It sounded to me as though the asylum inmates were running the prison.
Curiously, the outcome of that police investigation Claire reported on was never made public. In a letter sent by a prison inspector to Police National Headquarters in August 1986, it said,
"This letter will confirm that despite your investigations, allegations made that some prison officers have been involved in unlawful activities could not be substantiated. The Superintendent, Mount Eden Prison, will continue to monitor these allegations and will contact the Auckland Police if and when it is considered necessary. In the meantime, no immediate involvement by the police is sought."
This claim of corruption inside Mount Eden is one of those intriguing little sidetracks that tend to happen when you're looking into a story like this. When you have questions circling around your head, like how could the drug scene inside Mount Eden become so rife that it resulted in an inmate's death? And how could the prison staff miss that Darcy had been bashed? The possibility of corruption has come up time and again. Darcy's widow, Suzanne, suspected.
I do wonder why it happened. How could it have happened? How much, perhaps, corruption was in the prisons at the time?
And even the police star witness, Ernie, testified that things weren't as they should be during Ross's 1985 depositions hearing.
I would not wish ever to go back to Mount Eden Jail because of the corruptness amongst officers, and the tie-ins seem to have been between officers and inmates.
Ernie was asked if he was prepared to identify the prison officers he said were corrupt.
Not in this court, no.
Jim Stedman, the guard on duty in the kitchen when Darcy was killed, rejected Ernie's claim, testifying that he wasn't aware of any bent staff. And ex-Mount Eden guards I've talked to, like Bill Goodridge, backed that up.
The officers that I worked with, there was never any hint of untoward stuff going on in relation to inmates.
But having a proper, formal report to rely on for a definitive answer, rather than just a letter from a prison inspector, would really set my worrying mind to rest. So I asked police for any information still held about the 1985 corruption investigation. Unfortunately, they said no records could be found. Police did, though, tell Suzanne that based on the interviews with prison staff during the murder investigation, there was no indication of suspicious activities by prison officers. Years after his arrest, Ross wrote in his memoir about his own concerns around dodgy dealings. But in his case, it was the police he had a problem with. And with the blessing of his family, using AI and Radio Pacific's audio, we're able to hear Ross's words in his own voice.
I think they were getting embarrassed about the fact that they hadn't made an arrest in what looked like an apparently simple murder case. They were pretty desperate to hang it on someone, and I think I drew the short straw.
Some short straw, a murder rap with a long lag at the end of it. Ross suspected the police were targeting him. That's according to former prison guard Mark Anthony.
Ross Appelgren actually said it to me, was that he had done a lot of bad things in his life, but not murder, and those cops were desperate to get him because he made idiots of them. They were desperate to make him pay for some of the stuff that he had got away with.
I think more likely, the real reason for Ross's arrest is the one presented at trial, and that was Ernie's eyewitness account. Ernie's word against Ross's. To defend him on the murder charge, Ross had his longtime defence lawyer, Mary Beth Sharp. She was unable to be interviewed for this podcast as she is now a district court judge, and the case is back before the Court of Appeal. But in 1989, she spoke to Radio Pacific about her work on Ross's behalf.
I firmly believe that Ross is not responsible, and Ross is a very nice person, and he has been very badly framed in this, and it's one thing to serve a short prison sentence, which you don't deserve, but it's another thing to be serving a term of life imprisonment for a homicide that you didn't commit.
To help her, Sharp chose fellow defence lawyer Geoffrey Wells. It was going to be a tough fight. They were up against experienced Crown Prosecutor Stuart Grieve, who's now a King's Counsel. I approached Mr Wells and Mr Grieve for an interview. Mr Wells declined, while Mr Grieve said he couldn't comment given Ross's estate has launched a new appeal against his conviction. Ross's depositions hearing in May 1985 was the first time he heard what Ernie and Gordon had to say against him. In a 1996 interview with journalist Keith Davies for Metro magazine, Ross recalled a somewhat dramatic appearance from Ernie. When Ernie came to the point where he had to say he saw Ross attack Darcy, he apparently fell to the floor in the witness box.
I'd never seen anything like it. He was rolling around on the ground, screaming that he couldn't go on. I took him away.
The hearing transcript is slightly less descriptive, just recording, quote, witness visibly upset, court adjourns. Ernie returned half an hour later, regained his composure, and described witnessing Ross bash Darcy to death. As we heard in the last episode, at the conclusion of the deposition hearing, the court decided Ross would go on trial. The date was set for the 22nd of July, 1985. From the moment he was charged, Ross and his lawyers didn't think the police had given them all of Ernie and Gordon's statements.
I always suspected, and Ross was absolutely certain, that there were many more statements which were not being given to us.
They were right. For Ross's upcoming trial, they would only get Ernie and Gordon's deposition testimony, which was based on their police interviews that implicated Ross.
I fought long and hard, day and night, literally for many, many months, to get hold of all the statements that were made by the various persons concerned. The police were extremely unhelpful in every single situation and every step of the way. They had to be pushed to the absolute limit.
They weren't told about Ernie and Gordon's first interviews, the ones we heard in an earlier episode, where both men made no mention of seeing or hearing anything about the murder.
Mary Beth Sharp must have made inquiries to the Ombudsman. I remember receiving a phone call when I was in Parry Max. The Ombudsman's office said they'd been told there was no more evidence available, and that was it.
All rise.
The Honourable Justice Maxwell Vautier of the High Court at Auckland presided over case number 72/85, Queen v Ross Appelgren.
The first trial, I just could not take my eyes off him.
That's Darcy to Hira's wife, Suzanne Young.
And I just sort of had the stare at him and the smirk on his face. I remember the smirk on his face. And I just thought, oh my God, you're just, and I thought, you're a bad person.
She was only 20 when she sat through the trial of the man charged with murdering her husband.
I think Ross had made the whole situation about him and not really, about what happened to Tony. It was like, look at me.
Did Appelgren ever look remorseful?
No.
No.
Not once. Not once.
The trial was scheduled to last around a week, with a jury hearing from 27 witnesses, 18 for the prosecution and 9 for the defence.
And the Crown case at the trials was that Appelgren killed him after a drug deal went wrong.
Unfortunately, the hearing wasn't audio recorded, so the lawyers' submissions and the witness testimony you'll hear have been recreated with actors using the court transcript and media reports. Except, of course, for Ross Appelgren, which, as we've mentioned, is AI generated using his actual voice. On the morning of the first day, Prosecutor Stuart Grieve stood to give his opening address to the 12 jurors. Like all criminal cases in New Zealand, the onus was solely on the prosecution to prove Ross guilty of murder beyond a reasonable doubt. Grieve told the jury Darcy was killed with a heavy wooden paddle because he'd ripped off Ross Appelgren, a member of the jail's flourishing drug trade. Grieve explained that following the attack, prison staff located money and 16 cannabis joints in Darcy's locker. Those were the drugs the Crown believed Darcy had intercepted and started selling around the prison. Angered by the theft of his weed, Ross had brutally bashed Darcy, fracturing his skull and ending his life. At this point, Grieve set the stage for the introduction of his main witness, that brave inmate Ernie who'd stepped forward to see justice done while others stayed silent.
In a prison situation, the phrase, honour among thieves, has real meaning.
He then called his two key witnesses, Ernie and Gordon. You've already heard their police statements, but to remind you, here's the main thrust of their evidence at trial. First up, there was Gordon, who testified Ross was angry because he thought Darcy had nicked his drugs.
He said, "I'm definitely not going to let him get away with it. I'm going to deal to him."
Then there was Ernie, who said it all played out in front of him. Ernie described getting up that morning, doing the dishes, then going into the lunchroom to have a cuppa with another inmate I've called Logan.
Ross Appelgren came into the lunchroom and told Logan and I to fuck off were his words that he used. He had something to do.
Ernie and Logan did what they were told, and not long afterwards, Ernie said Darcy walked into the kitchen.
I saw him on 2 occasions when he entered the kitchen, and I saw him go through down to the bench area and the cooker-fryer area, and he disappeared out of sight, and the last time I saw him prior to entering the lunchroom was at the doorway going into the lunchroom.
About what time did you see him?
About 7 o'clock.
Did you see what he did when he went into the lunchroom?
No, I think he was carrying something. I didn't see what it was. And he went into the lunchroom. I saw his back.
So according to Ernie, Darcy enters the lunchroom around 7 a.m. A short while later, though he doesn't say how long, Ernie said he saw Ross.
He was going at a pace into the lunchroom. The paddle was like so, and he went in a bit of pace and swung this paddle, and I heard a clack, a loud kind of noise.
Do I understand you to say you saw 4 striking movements with the paddle?
4 swings.
The first from over the right shoulder, the remaining 3 from over the left shoulder.
Correct.
Ernie described Ross leaving the kitchen area with the paddle and then returning empty-handed.
Did he say anything to you?
Yes, he said to me, "You saw nothing, mate. Remember, nothing."
I want to leave the trial just for a moment and discuss the timeline, because to my mind, it's kind of key. Now at trial, Ernie testified Darcy went into the lunchroom at around 7 a.m. He doesn't say what time Ross attacked Darcy, but on my reading of his evidence, it's only a short time later. What's interesting to me is that the Crown's case at trial was that Darcy actually entered the lunchroom between 7:20 and 7:30 a.m. That's 20 minutes later. So why didn't the Crown rely on their main witness's timeline? Well, it's not clear, but it might be because the later timing is more consistent with the testimony of prison staff like Jim Steadman and the nurse, the witnesses, without criminal convictions. Look, now in fairness to Ernie, people can be mistaken about exact timings. But what the jury didn't hear was that Ernie's timeline had actually changed. In his first police interview on the day of the attack, Ernie said Darcy entered the kitchen around 7:30 a.m. and that he found him convulsing in his chair around 5 minutes later. Then, in his main police statement 6 weeks later, Ernie said it was about 7:10 a.m. that Darcy was in the kitchen and walked to the lunchroom where he was assaulted not long afterwards. Given Ross would testify he was somewhere else when Darcy was attacked for only 2 or 3 minutes, again, I think the timeline is crucial. Yeah, it wasn't really debated at trial. But that might have been because the defence team didn't want to get into it. Because Ross, well, he had problems with the timeline too. Okay, let's jump ahead a bit to Ross's testimony. When Mary Beth Sharp opened her case to the jury, she told them her client was innocent and had been made a scapegoat for a terrible crime. And, she said, they would hear from the man himself during the trial.
My full name is Ross Gary Appelgren.
Now, Ross's decision to testify was kind of unusual. People accused of a crime have a legal right to silence, and many exercise it. After all, they don't have to prove anything. Only the prosecution does. Some defence lawyers say it's usually too risky to put defendants on the stand. And that's because a skilled prosecutor like Stuart Grieve can do a heck of a lot of damage to a defendant's credibility by blowing holes in their story. But Ross thought the risk was one worth taking. He started by telling Sharp about his relationship with Darcy.
I first met Darcy in 1969 or 1970 in Paparoa Prison and I've known him ever since, off and on.
What was your relationship with him like at Mount Eden Prison after you began to serve your prison sentence?
Fairly casual, but we got on all right, yes.
Did you have any reason to injure Darcy Te Hira?
No, I did not.
Did you injure him?
No, I did not.
Did you have any specific conversation with Gordon or Ernie after Mr. Te Hira had been removed from the kitchen as to what might have happened to him?
Not specific conversations, no.
Ernie and Gordon had both testified that Ross's motive for murder was retaliation over stolen drugs. So was Ross the drug dealer the Crown said he was? Motivated to murder after Darcy took his stash?
During the time you were working in the kitchen, did you yourself smoke any cannabis?
Yes, I did.
Are you able to tell us who was your source?
I had two sources. Darcy was one and Gordon was the other.
Did you yourself ever participate in any drug dealing?
No, I did not.
Did you ever have any drugs ripped off?
No.
Now on this point, Ross actually had some support from Jim Steadman, the prison guard in the kitchen the day Darcy died. Steadman had earlier testified at the deposition hearing he had no reason to believe Ross was dealing drugs in the kitchen. It was a view shared by other former guards who knew Ross, such as Mark Anthony.
Was Ross someone that you knew to be involved in doing drugs or dealing drugs?
No.
Certainly not that I saw, Mike.
Dominic Malcolm worked as a guard at Parimoremo Prison when Ross was there in the early 1990s.
Having said that, though, I'd have to say that the prisons had a very robust system of being able to disperse drugs around the place, and you'd be pretty hard pushed, I would have thought, to be able to identify any one person who was responsible for it.
Back in the courtroom, Sharp continued her questioning of Ross. The next topic was the day of the murder. Ross said he started work in the kitchen just after 5 a.m.
Did you see Darcy Te Hira that day?
Yes.
When did you see him?
I saw him come into the kitchen from just past the lift entrance.
Do you know what time that was?
Approximately 7:30, around that time.
Then came the key part of Ross's evidence, and the heart of his defence, where he said he was when Darcy was assaulted.
Did you leave the kitchen at any time on the morning of 6th January 1985?
Yes, I did.
Do you know when it was you left the kitchen?
I don't know the exact time.
In relation to seeing Darcy Te Hira come into the kitchen, for example?
I saw Darcy come into the kitchen and I was working at the boiler, and it would only be a few minutes after that I left the kitchen for a couple of minutes.
Again, the timing becomes important. Okay, and this is the problem with Ross's timeline that I flagged earlier. If Ross says he saw Darcy come in around 7:30, and Ross goes to the toilet a few minutes later, let's say between 7:30 and 7:35 a.m, that means, on Ross's own timeline, he could have been in the kitchen during the period, which was 7:20 to 7:30 a.m, when the Crown says Darcy was attacked. I know hindsight is 20/20, but it's so frustrating, for me anyway, that there wasn't more effort by either side in establishing a more definitive timeline for the jury. And, if I'm being selfish, for someone like me, trying to make sense of all this 4 decades on. Back in court in 1985, Sharp was more interested in what Ross did after he left the kitchen.
Where did you go?
Down to the toilets.
How long were you away?
2 or 3 minutes, not very long.
After Sharp had finished with her questions, it was prosecutor Stuart Greaves' turn to cross-examine Ross. This was the risky part. Greaves now had the opportunity to push Ross and stress test the strength of his alibi.
I understand your evidence to be some short time after Te Hira appeared in the kitchen, you left to go down to the cell block to go to the toilet.
Yes.
And you were away for 2 or 3 minutes.
Yes.
I suppose you've got some witnesses, have you?
No.
Anybody being called to say they saw you down at the toilet or anything like that?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Next, Greaves asked Ross about Ernie's testimony, the man who'd accused him of murder. On one aspect, Ross actually agreed with Ernie. He admitted telling Ernie and Logan to leave the lunchroom shortly before Darcy came into the kitchen.
I told them to go and do some dishes.
Something like, get on with your duties, chaps, something like that.
In other words, yes.
Ernie said that you said to them, fuck off, I've got something to do. Did you say that?
No, I did not.
Nothing like that?
I might have used the word fuck off, but nothing like the other. General swearing in jail is just a general sort of thing.
Then Grieve introduced the next point he wanted the jury to latch onto.
The other man, Ernie, he hadn't been in the kitchen very long, had he?
No.
If Ernie was lying, why out of all the inmates did he choose to accuse Ross?
He said he had virtually no contact with you while he was in Mount Eden prison. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
You bore no grudges against him for any reason, did you?
No, not really. I hardly knew the fellow.
So far as you were aware, he had no reason to bear any grudges against you.
Not as far as I'm aware, no.
Grieve now had Ross right where he wanted him.
You see, Ernie then told us that having been told by you to get out, he moved back to the dishwashing area, and not long after that, he saw you going into the lunchroom holding one of these paddles. And then he says, and you heard him describe it yesterday, describe how the paddle was wielded, 4 blows being struck from over your shoulders. Do you deny that?
Yes, I do. Very much so.
So, he made that up entirely insofar as it involved you.
Where I'm involved in it, yes.
Why do you suggest he might do that?
At this point, you can see why Ross, his lawyers and the jury should have been told police had initially considered Ernie a suspect.
You told us he's got no grudges you know of. Why would he single you out as being the person to nominate for doing this?
Without knowing police had given Ernie an "it's you or him" ultimatum, Ross was just left to say,
I don't know his reasons.
You can't offer any?
No, I can't.
And as Grieve argued, Ross must have been bloody unlucky if another witness, Gordon, also implicated him.
For some reason, Gordon has chosen to put you in the limelight, so to speak.
Yes.
See, Gordon said about a couple of weeks before the 6th, you had said something about having been ripped off for an ounce of dope. Did you say something like that to Gordon?
No, I did not.
So, Gordon has made that up, has he? That's quite incorrect.
Quite incorrect, yes.
And he said that at one stage he was with you when Hira walked through the kitchen, and you said words to the effect you felt like smashing him over the head now. Did you say that to Gordon?
No, I did not.
So he has made that up as well?
Yes, he has.
So Gordon has come along and told a whole series of lies about what you have said to him.
That's right.
As an outsider looking in, there are things I'm surprised Ross didn't say. Firstly, he didn't offer up any suggestion as to why Ernie and Gordon were lying. He also didn't tell the jury what he told journalist Keith Davies in an interview more than 10 years later, that he knew what was in store for Darcy.
I had a fair idea of who was in on it, but I wasn't 100% sure. There was about 3 or 4 who I thought were going to be in on it, with 1 or 2 giving him a bash, while 1 or 2 kept an eye out.
Even if he wasn't 100% sure who had attacked Darcy, what did he have to lose? I mean, if he was able to nominate another suspect, it may have raised a reasonable doubt and spared him a life sentence. Was it that Ross just didn't want to be a narc? Well, friend and ex-con Greg Newbold says absolutely.
So, and that's what the problem Ross had when he denied having killed Darcy to Hira and said that he knew who had done it, but was unable to breach the code in order to save his skin because the code was so strong. And Ross was a person who respected that code.
At any trial, much of the most crucial work defence lawyers do is in cross-examination. They are dealers in doubt, particularly the reasonable kind. If they can't dismantle the prosecution case, they must at least disable it. Ross's legal team had 2 prongs of attack. Firstly, score what points they could with prison guard Jim Steadman, because as the police said, he was the only independent witness in the kitchen block on the 6th of January 1985. Secondly, and undoubtedly the more difficult task, discredit Ernie and Gordon, paint them as outright liars. There was a lot on the line. Internally, the Auckland CIB had concluded before trial that without Ernie's evidence, their entire case would fail. If the defence could undermine his credibility, then Ross would walk. It was as simple as that. So the pressure really was all on Ernie. But the police were ready to stand by their man. That's judging by the words of encouragement offered to Ernie by detectives and recorded in a 1985 police report, which would quote, "You perform for us, and we'll look after you." This is again another example of the key tensions in this case. Ross claimed this police promise to look after Ernie gave him a reason to lie. Say what the police wanted him to say and he'd get out. A new life, a new start. Or was the promise to look after Ernie just what Ernie and police said it was? An assurance Ernie would be kept safe from Ross and his drug-dealing mates. Now, it wasn't enough for Mary Beth Sharp to simply tell the jury Ernie and Gordon were both liars. She had to communicate what Ross hadn't. Tell the jury why they were lying.
Was there a deal struck?
Well, I'm certain there was. There must have been.
And of course now, decades later, we know that Ernie had certainly reached a deal with police in writing 2 months before the trial. He'd also been assured he wouldn't be going back to prison. But neither the defence nor the jury were ever told any of that. So, left in the dark, standing in front of Judge Vaultier and the jury of 12, Sharp had to rely on more circumstantial evidence. To discredit Ernie, she called an inmate who shared a cell with him at Mount Eden Prison. This man's name is also suppressed, so I'm going to call him Martin.
Did you used to hold discussions with him about personal matters concerning him?
Yes. The night he spent in the cell, he got quite personal with his life and told me about his wife and everything.
What did he tell you?
He'd like to kill her.
Anything else?
That he wanted to escape, get out of the place.
At best, this evidence showed Ernie's susceptibility to a deal from police. But it wasn't evidence that any deal had eventuated. It meant when Sharp came to cross-examine Ernie about his motives, she had to keep her questions quite broad. She started by asking him why he was narking, breaking that most important code, the inmate's code of silence.
Would you agree you're breaking the unwritten law?
I have a conscience.
So this is a matter of conscience for you today, is it?
Nothing else.
Do you know of any advantage you can gain from giving this evidence today?
None at all.
You have mentioned an unwritten law among prisoners that they shouldn't talk. Do you know of another unwritten law among prisoners that, not an unwritten law, an understanding or generally held belief among prisoners, if they do give evidence against fellow inmates, that they would gain an advantage from doing so?
Not that I know of, no.
You're not aware that in fact you may possibly gain remission of your sentence to a certain extent?
If it's done out of whatever consideration some people may think is necessary. I doubt it very much. The only problem I face now is that I have been in a protection situation where I was to be protected so that I would have been able to come to court today and give evidence. And as far as I know, that will continue until the end of my sentence. Whether someone in their wisdom might open the door and let me out, that's their problem, not mine. I don't know anything about that at all.
You won't be applying for a remission of your sentence?
No.
You will be content to serve out the sentence you were imprisoned for?
That's right.
Unable to knock Ernie off his stride, Sharp tried focusing on the risk he faced from giving evidence. Wouldn't he want something in consideration for that?
Would you tell us the disadvantages you face in giving this sort of evidence?
There is a lot of disadvantages, really.
What are they?
Going back to how far?
Well, let's break it down. Is one of the disadvantages of giving this evidence your fear of being attacked by other prison inmates?
Yes.
And is it a disadvantage that you should be in protective custody?
Yes.
For your own safety?
Yes.
Presumably, protective custody would have to continue until you end your sentence?
Correct.
I put it to you, you have done this to gain for yourself an early consideration to gain an early release from your sentence.
If I had done that, I certainly have not got anything out of it.
Do you know you won't be released early?
Yes, nothing has been mentioned to me. I've been called as a Crown witness, and if I don't give evidence willingly, I'll be subpoenaed to do so.
And you won't apply for a special early release after giving evidence today?
I don't know. I can't tell you that. I don't know what I'm going to do. I may apply. I may do a lot of things if I find it too difficult in the months to come. It may be necessary for someone to take some kind of action.
Of course, all these years later, we know it wasn't that simple. Ernie was saying he was gaining no advantage, he wasn't expecting to get out early. Yet we've heard he'd been writing letters demanding just that. There are police records showing detectives repeatedly assured him he'd get early release. He says under oath that he knows of no advantage he could gain from his evidence, yet had already spent about a month in a motel with meals out and day trips and knew that if Ross was convicted, he'd get out of prison and into witness protection. I mean, let's be honest, it's hard to square what Ernie said on the stand with what we've heard in the previous episodes. Sharp, though, knew none of this. She didn't have those documents, so she was fishing. And it was the same with Gordon, the Crown's other main witness. Without evidence of any advantages he may have gained, it was pretty difficult to pull off.
Isn't there a commonly held belief among prison inmates that if they give evidence or implicate another prison inmate to the police in respect of a major crime, they will get substantially early or even instant release?
I think that's a fairy tale myself.
Don't you believe it's a possibility in your case, and isn't that why you are telling us this story?
No, it's not.
But for Gordon, Sharp had a second line of attack. The suggestion Gordon, and not her client, was involved in Darcy's murder.
It's no secret and can't have been any secret to the jury because I was quite direct about it. I was of the view that one of those particular witnesses was in fact, if not the perpetrator of the crime, was certainly very, very involved.
This is Sharp from that Radio Pacific interview, talking about Gordon.
It was my view, of course, that he was giving evidence to save his own skin. He was giving the sort of evidence that was required to save his own skin and to point the finger of damnation at Ross.
At trial, Gordon told Sharp he was in his cell, asleep, when Darcy was attacked.
You obviously didn't have any fears yourselves of being charged by the police with this crime. Is that fair?
Yes.
And presumably that's because you say you weren't in the kitchen at the approximate time Darcy to Hira was attacked.
That would be right, yes.
I don't know about you, but these snippets from the court transcripts left me feeling like both Gordon and Ernie came out pretty much unscathed from all that Sharp was able to throw at them. The idea Ross was going to walk was starting to look iffy. The last witness I'm going to cover off is Jim Steadman, the prison guard on duty in the kitchen when the murder took place. In that 1989 interview with Radio Pacific host Tim Bickerstaff, Mary Beth Sharp explained how important she felt Steadman was.
Now, another difficulty facing the jury was obviously that nearly all the witnesses were criminals, weren't they?
Well, of course, yes. One of the few witnesses who wasn't was a prison officer who appeared to me and to a good many other people who were present during the trial to be, with the exception of my client Ross, appeared to be one of the few honest people who gave evidence.
Steadman first arrived at Mount Eden in 1978 and worked there for more than 25 years. Sadly, he passed away in 2018.
Really nice, funny guy, but quite a stubborn Irishman.
Former guard Paul Lobb worked with Steadman for decades in the prison system.
He can be very stubborn, but neat guy, a really good friend.
In fact, all the former Mount Eden staff I spoke to had good memories of Steadman.
Oh, he seemed like a pretty calm, controlled, competent sort of a guy.
This is Bill Goodridge.
He was a respected and honest guard.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, that's my impression of Jim.
He was a good fellow, mate.
Yeah.
Good, honest fellow, Jimmy Steadman, yeah.
Former guard Hone Horaki worked with Steadman and saw him shortly before he died.
We had a bit of a cuddle and whatever, and he thought, oh, man. And he said, but, good to see you, Hone, I'm done, bro. I'm done. So what happened was because he just asked me to do the prayers for him, mate, because he was a Catholic, Irish, see? Yeah. I did the last prayers for him at his house.
Do you remember Errol Dyer, the chief prison officer who received Ernie's anonymous notes? Well, he told me by email he would trust anything Steadman said 100%. We heard Steadman's account of the morning Darcy was murdered in episode 2. It remained effectively the same throughout. During cross-examination at Ross's trial, Steadman told Mary Beth Sharp he'd seen no problems between Ross Appelgren and Darcy to Hira.
Did you ever see any evidence of a bad relationship, bad blood between Appelgren and Hira?
Not that I saw.
From what you were able to see, did Appelgren appear to get on well with other kitchen inmates?
Yes.
And he was a good worker who gave no trouble in the kitchen?
Correct.
Crucially for Ross, Stedman also said it was possible for Ross to have gone to the toilet when he said he did, though Stedman didn't actually see him leave or return.
The cell block for the kitchen staff. There was free access once everybody had been unlocked in the morning between those cells and the kitchen.
Yes.
So that any member of the kitchen staff who needed to go back to his cell for any reason or go to the toilet, for example, could just walk down the alleyway and through into the cell block area.
That's right.
And it wasn't necessary to tell you they were doing so?
Correct.
To Sharp, Stedman's evidence was also significant for the areas where it differed from Ernie's. Ernie claimed Stedman's view of the attack was blocked by inmates standing in his office doorway.
Is it possible that there was Frank and 2 other inmates crowded around your office door talking to you at the time Ernie came to your office and attracted your attention?
I don't remember, ma'am.
Your memory tells you there was only Frank with you talking to you when Ernie came up?
From memory, yes.
Then there was Ernie's testimony that when he entered the lunchroom and saw Darcy injured, he noticed a broken piece of paddle on the floor.
When you went into the lunchroom to look at Hira on the first occasion, did you notice a piece of wood on the floor?
No.
But then a rather unusual thing occurred when Sharp had Stedman describe whether he saw spilled food on or around Darcy when he found him. The prison nurse who had treated Darcy earlier testified she'd seen food on the wall near where Darcy was sitting. Here's Mary Beth Sharp in that Radio Pacific interview on why this was all significant.
Ross was stirring a vat full, from memory once again, of rice. There was quite a description by one or more witnesses of porridge all over the lunchroom in which the deceased was found. And it was very logically a question to put to the prison officer concerned as to whether or not he saw any rice.
So at trial, Sharp asked Stedman that question. Her point was, if Ross had beaten Darcy with the paddle he'd been using to stir rice, presumably there would be rice found on Darcy or in the near vicinity.
When you went into the lunchroom the first time, did you notice any rice on the floor or the walls?
No.
However, Sharp says Justice Vautier, in his summing up to the jury, misunderstood the point of her question. Justice Vautier highlighted the fact that Stedman said he saw nothing of the food on the walls or on the floor, even though the nurse had. He then used that to criticise Stedman.
You might think that this hear nothing, see nothing syndrome seems to have been a little contagious, and that Officer Stedman seems to have seen remarkably little in all the circumstances, and that is to be taken into account.
So he therefore, shall I say, took the wind out from Ross's sails on that particular point.
Sharp said she'd actually been trying to build Stedman up, trying to emphasise the differences between his evidence and that of Ernie. And to make the point, again, that if Ross had beaten Darcy to death with a paddle used to stir rice, there would be rice all over the room.
Unfortunately, his evidence and the way in which he gave it was completely misinterpreted by Mr. Justice Vautier, who made it clear to the jury in his summing up what he thought of the witness, which was that he seemed to be suffering from a see no evil, hear no evil sort of syndrome. That was Mr. Justice Vautier's impression. My impression, and certainly other people's, was quite different. So if you accept him, you're dealing with nothing but prison inmates, virtually. And those prison inmates, of course, were in there for various crimes, for various reasons, for various lengths of time. And you're always in a position of difficulty there. You're asking a jury to believe one convicted felon, as the Americans would say, against another.
When the witnesses' evidence finished, it was left to Prosecutor Stuart Grieve and Ross's lawyer Mary Beth Sharp to give their closing addresses to the jury. A focus for both was persuading the jury that their convicted witnesses should be believed. Grieve went first and straight to the heart of the case: credibility. The credibility of Ernie, who said he saw Ross wield the paddle, versus the credibility of Ross, who said he didn't do it.
They are not people of good character, in any of them. The difficulty you have is deciding where the truth lies when you have people of bad character telling you different stories. They are all jailbirds, aren't they?
But Grieve asked the jury to consider whether Ernie was the same type of jailbird as the others they'd heard.
I suggest to you, running through some of the others was a whiff of the heavy. The heavy mob has been through the court.
He said Ernie was to be commended for being prepared to suffer the consequences of going against the criminal code, to narc against a fellow inmate.
The case illustrated a feature of criminal trials, that the Crown could not be selective in its witnesses. You have to take your witnesses as you find them.
Sharp then presented her rebuttal. Ross, she said, was in no way responsible for Darcy's injuries and didn't know how they'd occurred. As for Ernie, she warned the jury it would be dangerous to assume he broke the criminal code simply to tell the truth. He may have, instead, been seeking some personal advantage in return for giving evidence. Then there was Gordon. Sharp invited the jury to consider that maybe he'd lied to gain an early release because he couldn't stand prison. Or indeed, whether his motivations were more sinister, that he may have even been the murderer and was protecting himself by pointing the finger at Ross. The jury started its deliberations around 12:30 p.m. on Friday, the 25th of July 1985. While they were out, Ross felt so confident he had a nap, as he told journalist Keith Davies years later.
I was just so relaxed about the whole thing. I remember Mary coming down to the cells when the jury was out. She said, "How can you sleep?" And I said, "Because I'm going to be found not guilty, because I'm not guilty." Even though I knew it hadn't looked good in court, I thought it's not going to happen, you know. It can't happen because I didn't do it. And they just weren't going to find me guilty. I thought the lies that had been told in court that day were so obvious that no jury could be swayed by them.
Ross couldn't have been more wrong. The jury returned with their verdict almost 4.5 hours later. At 5 minutes before 5 p.m. that Friday, the jury foreperson stood and announced their decision. Guilty.
I was pretty bloody cut back. Up till then, I believed in the system, even though I'd been in the life I was in, because, you know, let's be honest about it, every other time I'd gone to court, I'd been guilty.
Sitting through it all was Darcy's wife, Suzanne Young, who had always believed Ross was guilty of murdering her husband. Now, a jury agreed.
He was guilty.
Yeah.
I said, yay.
Do you remember, was that what you actually said out loud?
I was like how I felt.
Yeah.
I said, you just deserve it. Like, justice has been served.
Reflecting on the verdict during her interview on Radio Pacific, Mary Beth Sharp was convinced Ernie's evidence had been the difference.
It seems to me, in retrospect, that the jury chose to believe rather the evidence of a white-collar criminal above any other criminals, and that may be a symptom of our society, that a criminal can be convicted of an offence which is basically a white-collar crime, shall we say fraud, something of that nature, and will be nevertheless considered to be perhaps more honest or more desirable than somebody who's in for a burglary.
Justice Vautier told Ross there was only one penalty he could impose for the charge of murder, a life sentence. Ross Appelgren, the career burglar, was now Ross Appelgren, the convicted murderer.
As I was driven away from court, a prison officer told me, "You're a mug, mate. You're taking a fall for someone else. You know it, I know it, everyone in the mout knows it. But how was I going to prove it? Who would believe me? Why should I be believed when so many others weren't?"
So Ross is off, back to Parry. Ernie is off, looking forward to freedom. This kind of feels like the end of the story. But it's not. It's so far from not. Ross begins looking for something, anything, to reignite his fight. What he didn't expect was that something would come from Ernie.
Gordon has probably done a lot of jail and now knows he could be in more trouble.
Something Ernie hadn't told Ross's trial, that he had accused Gordon, his fellow Crown witness, of involvement in Darcy's murder.
Gordon said, "What's your step today?"
Of course it's worthy of scrutiny. Why was something like that put to one side?
All this and more on the next episode of Nark. Thanks for listening to Nark, hosted and written by me, Mike Wesley Smith. I'm also extremely grateful to everyone who spoke with me for this podcast, especially Suzanne Young and Julia Appelgren. And if anyone listening has more information about this case, I'd be keen to hear from you. Send an email to nark@rnz.co.nz. Follow and listen to Nark wherever you get your podcasts, and if you've enjoyed it, use the share button to recommend it to a friend. Some more quick thank yous to Ngā Taonga and Mediaworks for some of the archival audio, and to the voice actors who helped bring some of the characters in this episode to life: Brendan Murphy, Justine Murray, Nigel Collins, Craig Genty, Duncan Smith, Jack Sargent, Kate Newton, Alex Gregg, Nick Robinson, Glenn Scanlon, and Corey Fuimaono. The RNZ producers who worked on this episode were Liz Garton, William Ray, Duncan Smith, and Justin Gregory. The audio engineer was William Saunders. Thanks also to Steve Burridge and Jeremy Ansell for the studio wrangling, and to Kevin Golding for opening the doors to me every week after hours. Graphics were designed by Amrita Marks, and the shorthand page, where you can find more information on this story, was made by Hingyi Kong. Check it out at rnz.co.nz/nark. Tim Watkin is RNZ's Executive Editor Audio, and Brianna Uritich-Gregg is the Production Coordinator. You can find more of RNZ's great podcasts like No Stupid Questions with Susan Edmonds on the RNZ website, rnz.co.nz/podcasts. Check them out. Bye for now.